the Brownpundits Browncast. So I'm here to talk with Carl Jha about a story that has been in the news in Pakistan, to some extent the Western media, and I'm assuming China as well. And it is about the importation of brides, or alleged brides. I mean, it seems like some of these are legitimate brides, from Pakistan. These tend to be young Christian women, and the Chinese men say that they converted to Christianity or they're recent converts, and they're looking for wives. As many of you probably know, there is a deficit of marriageable women in many age cohorts in China, due to sex selective abortion or infanticide, just mortality rate differences when they're young. These are sometimes called bare branches, in the academic literature and the historical literature. And the issue with this importation of brides from other countries is manifold. Uh, there's just the general issue of power imbalance when you have men from a more powerful or wealthy nation um, bringing women over from a less powerful and wealthy nation. And that is usually what's happening. And traditionally, it's happened from nations like Laos and Vietnam. The Pakistan case is really interesting because, to me, it was a little surprising because it's further afield. And if you have a Vietnamese wife in China, particularly South China, I think people probably would not notice immediately that there's a foreign woman in the village. I mean, they're both East Asian. They look relatively similar. Obviously, Pakistani women look quite different. So, one thing to me is, I'm thinking if this is a trend, um, it means that the situation is frankly quite desperate in China because, uh, you know, these are not. These are very, very different culturally, and they don't look traditionally East Asian. And I mean, Pakistan is relatively far away from China. Yes, it borders China, but Western China, so it's relatively far away from population centers. It's indicative of a desperate situation. Now, the problem is there are lots of allegations about impropriety, abuse, as extreme as prostitution, that these women are actually recruited for prostitution and not marriage. And in other cases, some more banal issues. For example, the men advertise themselves as very wealthy, and it just turns out that they are factory workers in China, and so they aren't very wealthy. They're wealthier than what these women would probably find in Pakistan, partly because they're often from poor Christian families. Christians in Pakistan tend to be marginalized and less well off, and so that's one situation. There are lurid rumors of organ harvesting. I'm going to just honestly say that I ignore those sorts of rumors because that seems like it's almost a trope of particular ethnic groups that sometimes want to be demonized. And also, organ harvesting rumors are so sensational that they exhibit a tendency towards virality. And when you dig deep, in 99% of the cases, there's almost no corroborating evidence of those rumors. Now, that is not always true. There are instances, in various situations where they have turned out to be true. But I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, it's just such a sensational tabloid claim. It's almost impossible for people not to share it. And there are certain preconceptions that people have about authoritarianism and just the frank, almost Darwinian brutality of life in China today with the competition in the new, capitalist order, that I think it is appealing to a lot of people's intuitions. But I think we can set that aside and just talk about the broader issues, which I think are reasonable and plausible, and they're not just limited to China. This has happened in Japan and South Korea in the past when they had cohorts that were gender imbalanced, sex imbalanced. So it's not surprising that it's happening in China. My main point with China is this is a nation that's 10 to 20 times more populous than China or South Korea. And so when China has a demographic imbalance, it's like a huge distortion, a huge demographic distortion in the local, space-time continuum, and so it's affecting so many nations. And a nation like Laos, there's no way that Laos can make a dent in China's demographic imbalance because there's not enough people in Laos. In contrast, Pakistan does actually have a fair amount of people, though. The cultural norm and to some extent interpretations of Sharia law is that non-Muslim men cannot, take a Muslim wife. So there's a bar in that direction currently. I don't know if that's going to persist indefinitely, just due to the alliance. Like, part of this looming in the background is the geopolitical alliance between China and Pakistan, which is really close, because you do have to wonder, why don't Chinese men just go to India, where there's plenty of non-Muslim women, where there's not a definitive bar on intermarriage, but the geopolitical relationship there is not closer. So I've been rambling on from what little I know at the 50,000 foot view. What I'm curious about is Carl's perspective as someone who is right now in China, and so presumably has been reading about this in the Chinese media. So Carl, can you tell the listeners out there what you know from your perspective?
Okay. So I first heard about this is through Chinese social media. I saw some, it's about a year or a couple years ago, I saw some advertisement for Pakistani Bride. At the time, I initially dismissed as a joke, because literally people were posting screenshot of advertisement like on lamppost, with people advertising for Pakistani Bride with their phone numbers, and it also claimed to be under the auspices of Chinese official One Belt, One Road policy, right? So for your listeners who are not familiar with Belt and Road initiative of the Chinese government, it's this very comprehensive strategy to build both geopolitical alliances and also just massive infrastructure project investment in other countries all over the world. But with the with the Belt and Road initiative, contrary to understanding in much of the Western world, it's not like a detailed, a long-term Chinese plan that's worked out in every facet of details. It's actually a proposal by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and in practice, it's like various Chinese entities, like whether state companies, private companies, they let's say they will claim that somehow they are taking part in this Belt and Road initiative. By the way, Belt and Road initiative stands for, I think, Silk Road Economic Belt and Maritime Silk Road. It's kind of clunky acronym in English, but the whole point is that these marriage brokers in China, right? They're trying to sell this idea of Pakistani brides to to, I guess, desperate Chinese would-be husband that this is some sort of legit business, and somehow they operate under the kind of the official government sanctioned Belt and Road initiative. I mean, it was just so laughable at the time. I just dismissed it as a joke. But then I started seeing more and more in Chinese social media, on Weibo specifically. People even post images and videos of Chinese men marrying Pakistani women, and my reaction was probably similar to yours. It was like, what the heck, what's going on here? And this phenomenon I have seen with occurring with many other Chinese neighboring countries, like specifically Vietnam and Myanmar. As you already addressed, there is a serious gender imbalance inside China. And I think there's two issues here. On one hand, there's a gender imbalance in China. There's a lack of marriageable women. But on the other hand, it's also a socio-economic thing. Uh, there's a phenomenon in China, so-called phenomenon in China called the leftover women, right? That Chinese government and Chinese media are supposedly stress out about are these uh, in what in their eyes, overeducated middle class urban women who may have been too picky in their younger days, and now somehow they're older now and they're being left over, right? The thing is, the Chinese men, uh, particularly in the rural areas, they don't have many options when it comes to the marriage market, right? Because the of the top picks of the Chinese women will be uh, the urban middle class or upper middle class Chinese men, and that this is combination of two factors is creating basically a market that these marriage brokers are trying to exploit. It's funny because I lived in China back in 1980s, and back then it was actually quite common for Chinese women to marry out, to marry Japanese men, particularly. Because at 1980s, China was so desperately poor, everybody was trying to get out. Because prior to that, China was in a period known as Cultural Revolution, and during Cultural Revolution, everybody in China was basically being told that everybody else living outside the border of People's Republic of China were living in dire conditions, right? And but by the time Cultural Revolution is over, Mao died, Deng Xiaoping opened up the country. That's when most Chinese realized, oh crap, it's not the rest of the world that was living in dire condition, it's us. And at the time, pretty much every child, every neighboring country of China was doing better than China. I mean, the only country that was doing more poorly than China at the time in 1980s was probably just Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Basically, countries that just came out of war. Just to give you some perspective, China, like North Korea in 1980s, enjoy a higher standard of living than China. Um, and so for me, it was it took some getting used to that. Now the trend is being reversed. Now the Chinese men actually looking abroad for wives. Initially was in um, just poor countries like Vietnam and Myanmar, particularly Myanmar because well in Vietnam, like you said, like there's not too much cultural difference between say China and Vietnam, right? Other than the linguistic difference. And with even with Myanmar, there's a larger degree of cultural difference, but at least they still look East Asian, and in cultural, in particularly case of Myanmar, there's a lot of trafficking of women from North Myanmar into China, and Northern Myanmar is an area with a lot of ethnic insurgencies. So like basically that area has been at war with the central Myanmar government since independence of Myanmar from the British, and frankly, the government of Myanmar doesn't give a shit about people over there. Like for all the ethnic minorities, the Kachin and the Shan people, Myanmar government could care less whether their women were being trafficked into China. And from the Chinese perspective, like that, it's an issue that was never looked at because it's only looked at as possible like immigration issue, right? Like the Chinese cops would deport these Myanmar wives if someone reported them, then they will be deported for violating the Chinese immigration law. But it's hardly looked at as a problem in human trafficking, which is what it is. And especially a lot of these marriage brokers they're, let's face it, they're pretty shady. Their goal is to make a buck. Like how they do it, a lot of times, they cooperate with the other shady organization in the counterpart countries, and I'm sure from what I read, that seems to be the case with Pakistan as well. Basically, these illegal marriage brokers inside China, they're just trying to exploit a market. And now that China is investing heavily in Pakistan, Pakistan is kind of a linchpin country in the Belt and Road Initiative of China. China is committed to invest a huge amount of money into Pakistan and building our infrastructure, linking it with China. And so these unscrupulous actors, they will come to Pakistan, work with their local counterparts in Pakistan. Essentially, they're trafficking women into China to marry these men in the rural area who would normally be considered unmarriageable material inside China. And except in this case, it caused a huge uproar in Pakistan because it has been reported in Pakistani media. Unlike the case with Myanmar, because Myanmar government couldn't care less because a lot of the time of the women that were trafficking into China from northern Myanmar are part of the ethnic minority groups, either Kachin or Shan, and nobody really kind of took their side. But in the case of Pakistan, because there's such an outcry about the intermarriage, and especially there's some very sensational report about organ harvesting, which I don't think they're true. That Chinese government right now is in a basically damage control mode. So they took it very seriously. They're cracking down on these illegal marriage brokers in an effort to basically.
Sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah,
Carl, but usually from the Pakistani perspective, it's always seen that Pakistan is always the recipient, like it's a very asymmetrical power relationship. So it's quite interesting now to see that how sensitive China is to Pakistani sentiments in that sense, because from the Pakistani angle, from what I know, it's always seen as China. We need China more than China may need us. So that's an interesting angle that I just wanted to explore. That how important is. I don't know how related it is to what you're saying right now, but how important is Pakistan to China's conception of foreign policy? That's what I would like to just explore a bit from the Chinese angle.
Oh, right. So, traditionally, the Chinese-Pakistan relationship is been characterized as so-called all-weather relationship, and it has been the case since basically 1962, when China and India fought a brief war, and that ever since then, Pakistan and China moved closer and closer together. It's really like kind of this like almost de facto alliance versus India, basically in geopolitical terms, and it's only till very recently it has been translated into more like cultural and economic sphere, because since 1962 to about let's say 2000, most of the Pakistan Chinese relationship was geopolitical, military, like political. It was like it hasn't really translated into other spheres. But now with a lot of Chinese investment coming into Pakistan, um, and in some cases are Chinese engineers, Chinese workers going to Pakistan. There's a lot more culture interaction at like a society level, right? And I think that really pushed a sensitive button inside Pakistan. Oh my God, they're coming over to take our women, right? That's like a sensitive issue would be in any country, and but in case of um, the position of Pakistan in the Chinese foreign policy perspective, um, China, let's face it, Pakistan is not the stablest country in the world, but because like China has a stake in seeing Pakistan stabilized, that is why China is committing a large sum of money into Pakistan. And I mean, a lot of these so-called Belt and Road initiatives, a lot of time it's more talk than substance. But in the case of Pakistan, China is actually committed to invest bulk of the money set aside for the Belt and Road initiative. It's building like ports, roads, power plants, a lot of infrastructure building in Pakistan, and from China's perspective, it's hoping by investing a large sum of money into Pakistan, you can help to stabilize Pakistan economy, preventing it to become like I would say a more of a failed state compared to India. That like that way, Pakistan can be like it's be like the play the traditional role in South Asia for China, basically a counterpart, like a counterbalance against India, right? And so that's the Chinese foreign policy perspective, and it doesn't want to like something like this intermarriage issue to stir up the waters, right? Like that's why they're finally cracking down on these official marriage brokers versus prior. China really didn't go after people trafficking women, say from North Myanmar, because that's just like that was like a non-issue because the Myanmar government didn't care about it, right? But this issue is obviously very important.
So,
Mm.
Carl, could I just
Sure.
ask you a quick question? I'm going to be like, we'll talk about the. I was saying that if you had to rank like the reason I'm asking is because we talk about this a lot at Brown Pundits, and especially in Pakistan, the chatter is about China. It's an overwhelming power, and in some ways, the joke is that we're like the peaceful singeing. We're like the happy, whatever you call your Muslim province. Is it called Xinjiang? I don't know the exact pronunciation.
Oh,
Is it
Xinjiang.
Xinjiang or Xinjiang?
Mhm.
Xinjiang, yeah.
You mean Xinjiang?
Yeah, so we're like the peaceful
Yeah,
philanthropy
yeah.
of China.
And that's
So if you had to
yeah.
rank, like, say, the top three China foreign policies in terms of countries, or top five or top 10, like, where would Pakistan be in all of that? Like, this is a question that a lot of Pakistanis think about. So I think our listeners and Indians as well, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So the thing with China is, unlike United States, which enjoy a series of alliances right around the world, especially in the Asia Pacific region, China doesn't have many countries that it can consider its alliance partners, right? Like Pakistan is one of the exception because I think right mostly because it's antagonistic relationship with India, and because it's troubled relationship with United States, especially since the end of the Cold War. So in that way, the China-Pakistan relationship became the so-called all-weather relationship. And from China's perspective, one of the goal of its Belt and Road initiative is to bring a tighter integration of the Eurasian landmass. Like China is trying to reach out to the market in Europe as well as in West Asia. In that sense, Pakistan become very important, because Pakistan plays a very important role in the future of Afghanistan. It plays a very important role in potential Chinese connectivity with Central Asia, West Asia, and even potentially South Asia, right? And that's why China is investing a large sum of money into building up roads and ports in Pakistan to linking it up with China. So like basically broaden Chinese reach into far further afield into places like Persian Gulf. One of the Chinese project is the port of Gwadar, right, which is very close to the Strait of Hormuz, the opening of Persian Gulf. The eventual goal was Chinese energy imports from Persian Gulf, whether oil or gas, can go via pipeline through Gwadar, through Pakistan, all the way to its region of Xinjiang in the west. That way, the Chinese could avoid over reliance of ocean shipment, which can always be choked off by the U.S. Navy, especially through the Straits of Malacca, which is a very strategic choking point near Singapore. And that's how the Chinese strategic thinkers think about it, right? They're just trying to diversify the Chinese energy import route. That way, if a potential conflict breaks out with United States, it's not going to be dead in the water if the U.S. Navy Seventh Fleet decide to blockade the streets of Malacca. That's why it's not only building all this infrastructure in Pakistan, but it was building all the gas pipeline in Myanmar as well. So the ideas is.
But I feel like Myanmar has come out of the orbit of China, like to some extent. Am I wrong in that analysis?
Yeah. I mean, like
obviously.
there was a hope. This is U.S. basically made a bid to move Myanmar out of China's orbit, right? That was the whole thing of the Myanmar government allowed the election, which was won by Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. But I think too much chagrin of United States that even after Aung San Suu Kyi's political party ascended to power in Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi herself made an overture to China. That's just because in terms of willingness to invest in places like Myanmar, China is willing to take on a lot more risks than say some Western companies, because for China it's also geopolitical. It's a strategic decision to invest in Myanmar than versus say some U.S. company who might have better options in like a more stable parts of the world, right? And yes, there was an attempt to pry Myanmar away from China, but China's influence in Myanmar is still very much in place. And the pipeline was already built. It is now like it's pumping gas from basically Bay of Bengal all the way to the Chinese southwestern province of Yunnan. I was in Yunnan just like a month ago. I saw the Chinese, currently right now, China is building out high-speed rail all the way to the Myanmar border. I see like concrete pylons being built out in the tropical jungles on my visit there. There's a whole infrastructure development along the China-Myanmar border that the China is rushing to complete. So, but we kind of stray from our original topic a little bit. So my to make a long answer short, Pakistan is very important, almost a linchpin in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, because its strategic position and because its traditional relationship with China, and that is why Chinese government don't want the don't want to rock the boat by something like this. This is like some very sensational and very emotional issue of like intermarriages, right? Like that's something that Chinese government is not is don't, it's something it's not something that the Chinese government is want to jeopardize its existing relationship with Pakistan with. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's quite a revelation, to be honest, because usually when you're Pakistani, you think the chips are always down. So it's quite interesting to see how important we are to at least one person, one country. I meant, it's nice in a way.
Yeah, I think. I mean, this is probably be interested to your South Asian audience. Is that in part it's because the unwillingness of India, basically, at least to officially sign on to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, India just has a huge market. I mean, Chinese companies are basically chomping at bits trying to get in some of the action, but India has always been very wary of too much Chinese influence getting in the country, and so Pakistan is almost kind of like the back door almost for China to get into South Asia. Because like I think China would very much like India to open its doors to the Chinese products and investment, but right now India is very reluctant. So Pakistan is the next. It's the next best choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Razib, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just listen to you guys. So it's a great conversation. So the geopolitical part is interesting. So, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
In terms of raw numbers, I'm assuming this is going to be relatively small. So, maybe I'll come back to Zach to ask more about the Pakistani view because he might know more about that. But so, from the Chinese perspective, what I'm confused about or curious about is, this sort of like marriage movement is not shocking due to gender imbalances. It happens in India itself, where in the Punjab in the northwest, right across the border from Pakistan, there's China levels of imbalance, and traditionally women from other parts of India have been brought in to intermarry, and also in parts of Uttar Pradesh, this was also an issue. Part of the problem is much of southern and western India is much more prosperous than northern India. Punjab is pretty prosperous, but there's not enough difference where women would actually move. So they have to, bring in women from, they used to bring in women from Bangladesh sometimes, but again, Bangladesh has like enough economic growth now that it's not much of a source. So they go to Assam in the northeast. So they keep looking around, right? And one of the things when you read the ethnography is these women are culturally different. They look somewhat physically different. They're, smaller and darker usually, these sorts of things. And there is a let's say that there's sort of a stigma associated with the children, somewhat from these mixed marriages, and there are actually lineages where they're traditionally like mixed now, where even though they're culturally the same as the other people in these areas of India, since their ancestry is from these other groups, other castes, other religions, other ethnicities. As you know, in India, endogamy is a really big thing. There's these like lineage groups and communities. So I wonder from the Chinese perspective, what I was surprised by is I know that Chinese people traditionally they prize fair skin, And also, I mean, it's just physically obvious that, except unless if it's someone from the very far northeast of India, this woman is obviously a foreigner. Unlike Vietnamese, where, if she doesn't talk,
Yeah.
she could probably pass as Chinese, especially in like the southern half of China, right? And so I'm just wondering, what is the Chinese like just reaction to this sort of thing? Because I mean, I'm sure that at some point, like, we could have a situation where women from Central Asia start coming into China at this rate then too. I mean, a lot of it is just like the population of the source countries, because Pakistan has a large population. Right now it's a taboo for Muslim women to marry non-Muslim men, but if Pakistan remains China's Shih Tzu or Chow Chow, like, the relationship is very close. Like, we could see cultural norms change even in, like, for Muslims, which is a much larger segment of the population of marriageable women. But what's the Chinese perspective on these women that look very different, where they're visibly foreign and they're going to have mixed offspring? I mean, what do you think? Although I do have to say, I don't know what the Chinese perspective is, but I know the South Asian perspective is when you see someone that is of mixed East Asian and South Asian heritage, they just look like a darker skinned East Asian. That's the perception from the South Asian view. So I don't know if like that's gonna have like second generation knock ons. But anyway, what's your view on that?
I do want to point out, there are over 20 million Muslims in China, and among the Muslim population in China, there's less of let's say, restriction marrying, say, Muslim women in Pakistan, right? Because religiously, there's not such a taboo in that case, and also the same gender imbalance also happened among the Muslim population in China as well. So at least among the 20 million Muslims in China, there will not be that kind of, there will be a less of an issue, right? Let's say, and I actually shouldn't be surprised that this is happening, because just a few years back, I know about this Chinese guy started basically a marriage agency trying to introduce Ukrainian women to the Chinese bachelors. Except he was running a more like aiming for like an upscale market. he was targeting like like a certain demographic in China. Like, he was trying to aim for like more like upper middle class bachelors, like, because he was charging a whole heck of a lot. And this guy was basically a Chinese guy who migrated to Ukraine like in the late 90s, and like now he's established in Ukraine. He has a business, he has a wife over there, and he became popular in Chinese social media, I think in part because he's such a novelty, like a Chinese guy in Ukraine, and on the top of that, he has a hot Ukrainian wife, and somehow he leveraged his popularity to like made a business out of it. I mean, I guess because of war in Ukraine, and he's also in the east part of Ukraine too. He's in like the I think I'm gonna butcher it, like Kharkov, the second largest city in Ukraine. Not in the part that's fighting, but kind of close. And Ukrainian economy has been really suffering in the last decade because of the conflict. And now he saw he saw opportunity to combine the desperate Ukrainian women trying to get out, and some Chinese bachelor looking for brides. And so I shouldn't be surprised that same thing was being replicated in Pakistan, but targeting a different, say, demographics, right? Mostly rural Chinese men. And also, I'd like to point out that the problem with rural Chinese men finding wife actually dates back even to 1980s, when I was still a child in China. Back then, one of the major issue that was reported in Chinese media is, the kidnapping of, say, like the Chinese women from the cities, all these urban middle class Chinese women being kidnapped and being sold by human traffickers as wife in rural areas. And it's like in China, like especially in 1980s, the city and the countryside is almost like two different worlds. There used to be a joke that the people in the Chinese cities they're in the first world, and the people in the Chinese countryside in the farms they live in the third world, right? I mean, it's this very sharp, stark difference, and also it also like it's a kind of the urban, shocking to the urban middle class Chinese sensibility that these educated urban Chinese women will be kidnapped and sold off as wives to some like illiterate Chinese farmer, right? And just a couple of years ago, in fact, there was a Chinese media report. They reported on a woman who is a teacher in a very like some boondocks place in China, like very rural part of China. But in the report, it came out that the woman originally was kidnapped, right, and sold off as a wife to a local farmer. But the article ended up kind of praising her for accepting her, like made something out of her circumstances, and then came to like accept her circumstances and adapt to it, and then become a teacher to the local children. And that article actually caused a huge uproar inside China, because people were like, what kind of value you're trying to promote here? This woman was a victim of kidnapping and human trafficking, and you are praising her for accepting her fate, basically. But so anyway, so the what we're seeing right now is that that dynamic, instead of playing out domestically, is kind of been spilling over to China's bordering countries like Pakistan, where understandably, it caused a lot of controversy and push a lot of hot buttons. I don't know where I'm going with this, so please feel free to jump in anytime.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think what you're trying to say here, or what the impression I'm getting is, this is a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. Yes. And a much bigger dynamic, which makes sense with a nation like China, which is going through economic dynamism, cultural change, and also its population of 1.4 billion or so. I'm assuming that's an underestimate because of people that are not on the books, but in any case, it's close enough. And so then you compare it to a nation like, I don't know, Ukraine with like 40 or 50 million or whatever people. Obviously, it's going to have like a big impact. And I was actually looking at the GDP per capita, and Ukraine is actually lower, right? Now, partly because of the war, but like nations like Russia, their GDP per capita now is not really much greater than China's at all. And then India is still considerably lower, but still you have these Asian nations coming up. I guess like the question that I want to get at though is like, so you're talking about these Ukrainians, and I don't know. I only have perceptions and stereotypes. Let's be honest. I don't know about like Chinese culture, but I can see like there's still a view that white people, Western people are an advanced civilization, right? In terms of just like because the 20th century, let's be honest, like 20th century, and so like having a Western wife might be a white wife, because like you can be non-white and Western, obviously. A white wife might be a little almost like a status symbol, exotic. Obviously I'm not saying it's like totally positive, because there is some level of ethnocentrism wherever you go, but that's probably not going to be like that big of a deal. I guess what I'm asking though is like having like having a wife from Vietnam, for example. That's almost, I feel like my perception would be that's almost like undercover. Like, yes, if someone knew you, they would know that this is a foreign person, and you have in the United States, having a quote unquote mail order bride is it's kind of like it's a little bit of a social hit. Like, I mean, it's an awkward thing. I don't know too many people that have done it, but I've heard of them, and even if the wife is actually educated and it's almost like an arranged marriage situation, it's still awkward in the context of American culture to have to explain this situation, and people have certain suspicions of like why you did this. Like, are you a loser, or is there abuse going on now? So
I mean, you can look at Richard Murdoch. I mean, like Murdoch,
Mhm.
right? I mean, he had a at one point he married a Chinese
Mhm.
wife, and I remember there was a video going viral when he appeared in court. Someone was throwing a pie at Murdoch, and his Chinese wife basically blocked it, and then. A lot of people first they were surprised that his wife was a lot younger, and there were comments like male bride order much, and, that even as for someone in his position, right? I mean, like people would bring that as something against him, like as a social mark. But anyway, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and also like, so I'm just wondering about like the Chinese perception here, because South Asia is relatively underdeveloped compared to China right now.
Mhm.
Also, these women are probably darker skinned. Their features are such they're obviously not East Asian. Okay, so it like
Mhm.
these rural men, it just like sticks out that they have these foreign women from, and they're not like blonde Ukrainians here. Like we're talking like they're
Mhm.
kind of like swarthy, you know.
Well, see, it's funny that you because because the sense of a racial category is a little bit different in China than say other parts of the world. Every parts of the world have its own particular. I remember one time. So the funny thing that you mentioned about the looks, right? Because the Chinese are not this very sophisticated in many cases. Because a lot of, in fact, a lot of Pakistani men, right, that were coming over to China as exchange students or businessmen, uh, ever since like 80s, basically, a lot of them have like pretty good success with with the Chinese women, in part because they, in China, there's basically two categories, right? You're either Chinese or you're foreign, and the Pakistani would obviously fall into the foreign category, and many times like they just look Western enough for the Chinese in the Chinese eyes, and a lot of the Pakistani men, the reason they had a lot of success, in times of dating and marriage market in China, is because they look close enough as Western in Chinese eyes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yes, we heard.
yeah.
We heard yesterday. We did a podcast, and it were like distant cousins in the Indo-European families. Razib, if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess I don't know. Maybe like America is South Africa for the 21st century, because I feel like we have very precise and specific categories
Yes.
that we try to export to the rest of the world, and other people are like, wait, 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 wait. Like you seem to have a science of this
Yeah,
in your own head, and
yeah, yeah. In fact, the one reminded me of, I saw this YouTube video a while back. It's a bunch of African American guys. They were in China. They were handing out. They were just asking opinions of Chinese passerbys on the streets. Right, they're handing out like famous photograph of some very famous African Americans, and ask the Chinese to identify their race. Right, and of course in most cases, a lot of the fair-skinned African American personalities that they on the photograph that the Chinese people just assumed they were white.
well, yeah,
Because
I saw a thing in Korea. They were showing people American celebrities, and they were showing Korean men Beyonce, and they're like, "What do you think about her?" And they're like, "Oh, she's very beautiful. She tans a little too much. That seems unhealthy." And then people are like, "She's black," and they're like, "What?"
yeah, yeah.
She probably does the opposite, Beyonce. I mean, she's getting lighter with every passing
Well, I
year.
mean
No,
that's
but
a Photoshop, though, right?
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even funnily enough, like in Uganda, African Americans were often taken to be white because I mean it was just like obviously their color is just not the same color as the traditional Africans. So you saw the same thing there where they were just not coded as black. So it's just an interesting dynamic I thought I would add.
Yeah, yeah. And in Chinese case, there will be a little bit colorism over here. So let's say like a fair skinned Pakistani or close enough, they can pass off as like Western, whereas someone who is obviously with more, let's say, Southeast Asian features that they might not, right? So there will be considerably difference in how people were treated based on their looks, right? And you're right. You're right. There is definitely a minus against people with darker skin. And yeah, I just don't know. Like, I mean, like right now, it's just not I know it's a huge deal in the Pakistani media, but this whole thing is barely a ripple in the Chinese media space. I only knew about it because I initially saw those ads for Pakistani brides in Chinese social media, and I was like, "What the heck?" And then on Twitter, I saw all these like outrage, coming from Pakistan about this issue. But in terms of to the Chinese domestic audience, many people probably not even aware of this whole thing, and in terms of how people like that will be perceived. First of all, like these are mostly rural Chinese men, right? And I mean, even in case of like people who import wives from Myanmar, right? Like in rural villages, everybody knows everybody. It's like it doesn't matter if you can pass as Chinese physically, people will know that so and so has a wife from Vietnam or from Myanmar, and also like people also would know that that person went to get a wife in from Vietnam or Myanmar or Pakistan or whatever the case is because he has problem finding wife locally, right? I mean, like that would just be understood, and in terms of how like their wives will be or their children will be perceived more widely in the society. I mean, right now they're just not too many cases, right? I would say like that's to be even like on the radar of a lot of the Chinese media. Like I mean like there are some I think the most famous case was this few years ago, a Lou Jing who was raised by a Chinese single mother, and her dad was.
Carl, could I just interject with one question? Like Razib alluded to that in India, we saw regional matchmaking. So women from Bihar go to Punjab. Is there a phenomenon of that in China itself, where poorer Chinese provinces are sending girls to richer Chinese provinces as well? Is there any regional dynamic?
Okay. So this you have to look into the broader context of the Chinese economic development. Obviously the Chinese is a lot more. The Chinese cities on the East Coast is a lot more economically developed than the hinterland out in the west or the center. So what have been happening in the last 3 decades is the Chinese miracle happened on the coast, right? So all these young Chinese women after out of high school or college, whatever, mostly high school, they come out of the inner provinces and they will go travel to coastal cities for work. All right, that's part what drove the Chinese miracle is all these migrant laborers from poor provinces going to coastal regions like Guangdong, like area like Shanghai. I mean, that's still happening today. In fact, that I was, I mean, I don't know if I almost should talk about it, but it's not like say specifically for marriage. It's this people were physically moving for jobs. So they're physically moving from one region of the part of the China to a totally different region with different language, different culture, and everything is getting shifted around a bit in China itself. But of course these Chinese women, like the local men on the East Coast, they will definitely have a leg up, right, in the marriage market because they have residence in these wealthy cities. They're presumably wealthier, and they're, of course, it will have a leg up in the marriage market. They will have more appeal to say these girls from farms out west, right? But it's more like an organic process than say like a marriage broker or arrange to have women from one part of China going to other part of China for the specific purpose of getting married. It's more like these women are already here. They're already out in the East Coast cities on their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's good. Carl, can I ask you a question about just like gender choices of marriage and dating and stuff
Yeah.
like that in China? So one of the issues is, different cultures have different norms about this sort of thing. So in South Asia and in West Asia, like say the Arab countries, Islamic countries, Iran, etc., there is an extreme tendency towards mate guarding. Let's put it that way. And in Islamic countries, if you convert to Islam, if a foreign man converts to Islam, maybe. But this was one of the issues with the American occupation in Iraq. It wasn't like Vietnam where there could be liaisons with local women. The local women were just not available unless the soldiers converted to Islam
or local Christian women.
It was extremely taboo.
Right.
Yeah, but even the Christian women, I mean, there aren't that many, but yeah, that's fair. That is, I have heard that. And so, there's that going on. And in South Asia, I mean, even if, within Hinduism, like converting is not as much of a thing, partly because it's so caste-based, right? And so you have this thing where like violence gets triggered. So the Hindus have this thing where they're convinced because they love jihad, where Muslim men are seducing them. And yet it seems like in East Asia, this sort of, I mean, there is some angry reaction. Like I've heard of there was a famous incident in not famous, but there was an incident in South Korea a couple of years ago where a Pakistani man was sitting next to a Korean woman and they were friends. I don't even know if they were in a relationship, but there was like some sort of like verbal racial abuse on the subway from Korean man because, you should be sitting with this foreign man, etc. That's really, so I'm not saying that those feelings are not there. And yet I do get the sense there is a stereotype, which is, I think, fading now because of like development of like white men coming to China and dating Chinese women and, this sort of thing. And we've been mostly talking about men finding foreign women in this podcast, but I'm just curious what the Chinese perspective on foreign men with Chinese women is like. Is there a lot of anger and it's just like sublimated, or I mean, I just wonder what this difference comes from. Like, do you have any intuition?
Yeah. I mean, so so a lot of the time that it's especially back in the 80s, in the older time, if you are a foreign man, you're in China with the Chinese partner, people usually kind of look at you, just assume that like either she's a hooker or she's just with you because of your passport. I mean, like that was just assumed that back then. And I mean, there's not too much like social taboo against out marriage as like say back in the 19th century, because back in the 19th century there was a serious taboo against like say Chinese women marrying foreign men. It was like I remember reading about accounts of 19th century Hong Kong. It was just not done. But well, back then, a lot of the more say well-to-do Chinese women from good families, they're mostly cloistered anyway. They're not allowed to go out of the house. So back then, say in Hong Kong, the only Chinese women available to the foreign men were the tankas, who were basically on the very bottom rung of the Cantonese society. They were like kind of like untouchables. They were despised, and only the tanka women who usually engage in prostitution trade or whatever would be even open to having relationship with foreign men, and that has evolved quite a bit, through the last 100 years, to the point that there's not really a social taboo, but yes, there's a lot of resentment, of course, from the Chinese men. That's always there. I mean, I even see it on social media. Basically, the Chinese men complaining that the Western men enjoys this kind of edge, right, in the dating and the marriage market, and they just complain that somehow the Chinese women are not patriotic enough, or they would always kiss up to the foreigners, think foreigner is better. I mean, there's a lot of bitterness. I mean, I a lot of this. I mean, from my personal opinion, it doesn't. It's not significant from all this anger of, say, like the incels in the West, right? It's just the anger of they're not getting laid, and they what they perceive as like kind of unfairness in the dating and the marriage market. But socially, like, let's say it's not like, let's say like a parents, if they have a daughter who is married to a foreign man, there's not that same social taboo as used to have back in the 19th century. Like now it's just, oh, it's okay. I mean, it's not a big deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think and maybe Zach can jump in because he spent more time in a lot more time in South Asia than I have. I think the issue in South Asia, for example, and I think West Asia as well, though, it's as if like if you're part of a patrilineal kin group, which I know exists in China as well. And so I guess the issue is we have these anthropological categories of patriarchal societies, and it's on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think China, you could say, is a generally patriarchal society.
Sure.
And, in South Asia and West Asia, these are also patrilineal societies. The kin groups are through the males.
Mm-hmm.
And, these are groups of men that kind of control the prestige of their lineage. Mm-hmm. So if a woman from your lineage group,
mm-hmm.
marries out, that reflects on your honor, and this is why there is such extreme violence that emerges out of it. And so I guess like my question is like, what is going on in the minds of a patrilineal kin group in China when this woman marries a Westerner, and you just said people perceive them to be prostitutes or something. I mean, maybe not today. I mean, things are changing.
I mean, like back in the 80s, like basically back in the 80s, the perception is that like that woman is a social climber, right? Like a gold digger. But other than that, there's not really like I know what you're talking about, but like, let's say if like my cousin marrying a foreigner, it's not really a big deal. It doesn't reflect, say, badly on the family. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
I mean, also
you are not your cousin's keeper.
I'm sorry?
You are not your cousin's keeper.
Exactly. No, not at all. No, not like that. Like like there's like within some family, right? That there might be some kind of pressure, like if they think that was a bad choice, and they might talk to their cousins or whatever. But really, there's the power over, say, like your female cousins is really limited. It's only like you can tell them, oh, I think that's a bad idea. Like I don't think that guy. I think that guy's up to no good. But blah blah blah. But yeah. It's. I mean, China has changed quite a bit because my grandparents, both on both sides, they were in arranged marriages. Like my all of them got introduced by marriage brokers, right? And then my parents were actually the first generation that met on their own, right? Because just because the Cultural Revolution caused such a shock to the Chinese society, and then my dad were sent away. Both my dad and my mom were sent away from their home cities, and they end up in in Tibet, and they met and fell in love and got married. So they were the first generation that was not like met through arranged marriage, and that has been the case ever since, pretty much. So it's like there's like not that same level of control within the clan group over marriage anymore.
Yeah, that makes. I mean, that's just like really straightforward. Like, if the marriages are not arranged, if the family is not involved in that already, it seems like their control and level of consider, because part of the issue with female honor in some of these societies is all the marriages are basically arranged, and if you lose face and if you lose honor because of the actions of one person, that can actually percolate to the whole kin group,
Right.
in terms of impacting the marriage prospects of your cousins, or even your second cousins, because word spreads. This is the type of person is produced by this family, and so it's a huge impact on other people. That's an interesting contrast. So I guess, like, we should close out. I am curious about. So I know that this is sensational, but let's like put the sensationality
Sure.
aside. You do have this sex imbalance. It's huge, this gender imbalance in rural China. China's getting wealthier, but Vietnam is as well. I mean, I guess, like, do you have an educated guess on what are these men just going to be single, or are they going to find wives from somewhere? And if somewhere, where? Like, can you have a general sense? Because, like, before we got on the podcast, I was Googling it, and like, there are Chinese men now who are marrying African women, which obviously would be like totally surprising, like 10, 20, 30 years ago. So, I mean, what do you see proceeding into the future on this specific question of like the demographic imbalance and how it gets resolved?
Yeah. I mean, so traditionally, has always been a segment of Chinese male that never find wives and never get married, never pass on offsprings. I mean, like in particularly in the part of China I'm in right now, the Yangtze Delta region, which has a very good record keeping, and I know many. This part of history was being very well studied, and what they found out that was in the lower Yangtze Delta region of China in the last 500 years, it has always been the most densely populated part of China. But what they observed was, as the Chinese population exploded, the population in Yangtze Delta stayed fairly constant. And what they find out was there were specific mechanism for that. Is because the lower 20%, the 20% of the men who are on the bottom rung, they just end up never getting married because they couldn't afford to have wives, so they never passed down offsprings. And it's like the downward mobility, right? It pushes other people, the other people who became poor then became replaced them generation after generation, and I see some part of that plays out, right? Because like right now the marriage market is very competitive in China. That is whole reason why there's a whole proliferation of these like marriage brokers trying to bring in foreign women, but also a proliferation of sex trade, inside China itself, and that somehow alleviate, I guess, if that's the right word, the problem. But there will always be a segment of the Chinese male population, just like historically, they will never get married, they will never pass on their genes, and that will be that.
You know what brings to my, I know we're wrapping up soon enough, but what brings to my mind is that in Israel, I once read an article about this. I don't know how true or not it is, but in the Orthodox community, like an Ashkenazi boy, if he's really desperate and he's really a no hope, I mean, they'll offer him Sephardic girls as a wife. And in a lot of ways, what I kind of feel, I know it's a bit controversial to say this, but I think it's pretty, I think that's what the backlash is with the whole Pakistani bride, Chinese man, groom thing, is that you are really seeing the 20% who would have never gotten married. And as you say, and they're kind of the ones who are now actually going abroad and essentially siphoning women from poorer countries. And Pakistan is always a perpetual basket case. So it's so I think there's a bit of that
Yes.
dynamic going on.
Yes,
Essentially.
yes. Like these men, otherwise, in traditional China, they will just not have any prospect of finding wives at all. Now they have the options of, say, going abroad. But I like I said, I mean, there's such a big, I mean, the numbers that would be needed to kind of completely um, like to balance that out. I don't think that number can be easily found outside China. So I still think there will still be a significant number of men that will remain single or so-called bare branches. But yes, some of them will be able to find wives through means like getting brides from overseas.
Well, so yeah, I mean that. So I guess, like, as we're wrapping up, um, it seems like a lot of this is just the sensational tabloid aspect of it, and unfortunately, there aren't too many Chinese people on Twitter, so most of the responses to the tweets that are out about this story, and the Chinese deputy ambassador of China, I think, posted something with a, I don't know. I don't know Urdu, so I don't know what she said. But a woman with a Chinese. I retweeted it yesterday. I don't. Did you, Zach? Did you see my tweet? I don't understand Urdu. I don't know what she said. What did she say?
I'm trying to. I didn't see that tweet at all. So
Let me. Yeah. Let me. I'm gonna find it. We're gonna do this in real time here because it really like annoys me that I should know some more South Asian languages. But I'm gonna post it right here. Okay, I got it. So this does not. This woman looks. Let's just say that she looks. She does not look like a poor peasant or anything like that. Zach, I just posted the link in the chat.
okay, yes.
Okay.
I was looking for it.
Okay, and if you can put yourself on mute and listen to it and tell me what she says, because I don't know what she's saying. So there are people in the responses. A lot of Pakistanis are angry. They're saying this should be banned, that this is wrong. So they're taking it like as if it's national honor. In any case, like some people are saying like this is fake, that she's an actress, and this is not a real couple. It's just like lots of weird responses, and so I mean. Yeah, honestly, like she's pretty attractive, frankly. So I do wonder if this was just like a PR thing, which I don't have like that much of a problem with. But I don't know what she's saying, and it's just not someone that looks like they would have a very difficult time finding a husband in Pakistan. Let's just put it that way. So I don't know what's going on. What's going on with that?
So the video I saw, it was like you said, it's a very attractive Pakistani woman. I guess she's posing with a Chinese man, or supposed to be Chinese man in the video, and it's mostly her talking. And I'm assuming I don't know Urdu either. I'm assuming she's talking about like the intermarriage happened out of consent and love should be free. That's my assumption, but we'll wait for the expert.
Yeah. Because I was like listening, and I could.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I saw the video right now. No, she's just saying that she loves China and that her husband. I mean, basically, she's saying it's really good. She's being respected by her in-laws. She's really happy. But I mean, she's a very pretty girl, and like, she's almost. I would be shocked if she's Muslim, because what she's wearing and the way she's comported herself, she's. definitely Christian. But I mean, it's like she's a lot better looking than her husband, so he's obviously
Well,
very
I think
happy.
that's what some of the anger is about.
Yeah, but also the way she's dressed and she's sitting on his knee, it's like, I mean, when I switch into Pakistani mode, it's like, oh my God, I can't see, like, like I can understand that does aggravate a lot of people, but
Okay,
I
so
mean, Pakistan.
why is it aggravating? I mean, like,
No, no, I'm just saying the Pakistanis, we don't do PDA, right? It's not, I mean, I'm just saying the traditional culture, and she's there sitting on her husband's knee talking about how great life is. I mean, it's fine, but obviously there's this whole thing. It's also a question of humiliation, right, for a lot of Pakistanis because now, like Pakistan banned Pakistani women from working as maids in the Middle East. So Pakistani women do not work as maids in the Middle East. So there's, what you were talking about, the whole idea of honor vesting in the women. I don't think it applies so much to China because of the Cultural Revolution. But for Pakistan, it's a huge thing. And now, and this is economics, right? All these women, I mean, we have the reverse problem, and it's all over Muslim society. There are a lot of women, and there are just not enough men to go around. So if you go to any Muslim culture, any Muslim society, even in diaspora, it's the same phenomenon. It's the spinster effect. So these women, and the Chinese seem to be quite practical, right? So they're the types, they're very utilitarian, they kind of sort things out. They don't look at it with an emotional lens, and they're responding to both sides are responding to a market demand. So it's probably just going to happen in a more sensitive manner because I've been reading the reports as well, and they're pretty shocking because a lot of the girls are saying that they're being forced to sleep with other men. So it's almost like I'm just saying what I'm reading in the English language reports. It's even I get a bit like it boils my blood as well. Like you don't want to see
no,
Pakistani
no.
women being used as glorified
Any women. I
prostitutes.
mean, that has been like a problem that has been reported in some parts of China. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen in some cases. The key is like, what is the quantity? What is the magnitude? Is it just proportionate? Is it systematic? I think we need to withhold
Yeah,
judgment on that,
yeah,
just because, I mean, we don't know. And we just need to be careful about these things. Like I said, like the organ stuff, I'm skeptical because every time I look into the organ stuff, it's always like tabloid rumors, and of course in China they do everything, and so I mean that's like playing upon stereotypes. So I think we need to be careful about that. Yeah, I guess we need to close up. I was going to ask like one last question. With this there's these questions. It's not a big deal, but about like these men are lying and they're saying they're converting to Christianity and stuff like that. And it seems from the Pakistani perspective that they are just outraged and shocked that someone would do this. And my own perception is from the Chinese perspective, it's just not that big of a deal. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. You
do you know what I'm
you're
saying?
right. Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah,
they're just like, whatever, we'll say we're Christian, we don't really care. I mean, I'm
exactly.
assuming that's what's going on there. They don't understand like how outraged a religious person from Pakistan, whether they're Muslim or Christian, would view some sort of nominal religious saying that they're Christian. I mean, there are a lot of devout Christians in China, but I can just imagining some person being like, okay, yeah, I'm Christian if you
Yeah,
want me to be Christian, whatever,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
and then they go to China and the guy like doesn't really care.
yeah,
I mean, so they're like, "What is this?" And it's just like, well, I mean, it's a very practical move, right?
yeah.
So that's just like a big cultural difference there. So there's all these cultural differences that we're trying to, um, uh, you know, jump. And it's interesting, like as we close out, like I do like to like. I'm very curious about Asian societies in general because in the age of like European hegemony, we talk about Asian societies and Asian values, but now that Asia is like what, it's like almost half the world's economy or something. It's like a huge part of it. It's not half, but it's coming up there,
Hmm.
and we need to like start thinking of these societies as distinct and individual and like totally different streams of like human civilization.
Yeah,
And what you were saying, about like Pakistani men or Pakistani people, especially if they're lighter skinned, like almost being viewed as Western in
hmm,
China. I mean, that's not totally crazy in some ways. It's like obviously like genetically that's one thing, but even culturally, I think there are some ways where I think East Asians are different from. So I mean, Carl, I will tell you, I was with I was with I would say more of an acquaintance, but a relatively like well-off person, a very well-off person. Uh, and they were saying that they were in China, like Silicon Valley investor type, and the Chinese government was pretty angry or like confused as to why there were so many more Indian American executives. Indian, I mean, some of them they were Indian, but like like the number of like executives of South Asian background in Silicon Valley is way disproportionate compared to the number of East Asian, of Chinese in particular, even though in the pipeline, there's probably still more Chinese. And they didn't understand what was going on here. And a lot of people just have told me in Silicon Valley, it's partly because like Indian people, like their personality is just more outgoing, more talkative, more aggressive. And that integrates well within like the quote unquote leadership culture.
And I think on top of that, like a lot of the educated Indian elite, they're already kind of embedded in the Western culture. From say like somebody educated in China, right, straight out of China, they come from like a totally different cultural background, right? Let's say, whereas somebody from India, from educating a top school, whatever, they're already like kind of have been, I want to say, acculturated in the Western culture before they even come to United States, and I think that does help.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting contrast. I mean, like, I have like friends in the conservative movement, and they have various attitudes towards China. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious I'm relatively Sinophilic, but some people are quite less so. And, they view India as basically the great ally against the rise.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The rise of the dragon, right? It's basically like, when the 21st...
The Anglosphere. There used to be a talk of the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it as much anymore, but, I mean, it's not even Anglosphere. It's just like realpolitik, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but also that that is India a Western country? Is it going to be another Japan in a way profoundly different, but also Western in a certain aspect? And I think it's I think it's very very fascinating, because this is going to be the great question. If Pakistan is China's proxy, then India is obviously going to be the proxy of the U.S. or the West.
Well, so I think the key thing to distinguish is because of English medium education, the Indian cultural elite is to some extent it is continuous with the Western cultural elite. There are node points, like say someone like Salman Rushdie or Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy is an Indian cultural notable, but she's also a figure in the West, if more marginally so. Salman Rushdie is probably 50-50 in terms of his prominence as a British or Western intellectual and as an Indian. And so you have these people that are transmitting cultural mores and values across the ecosystem. So the Indian cultural ecosystem is connected in some way with the Western one. And then there's a whole, like, these Hindu nationalist intellectuals who are not connected with the West, and that causes some problems with their, like, optics, with the way they're perceived. But these Hindu nationalists are connected with the Western-oriented ones. So you can, like, go step by step from India to the West. In terms of cultural influencers, I don't think that's the case in China. And frankly, like, this is where Japan is also different, because the Japanese turned away from multilingualism at some point in the 20th century. It used to be much more, they used to study German and English much more around the early 20th century. And then they turned away from multilingualism. And I think that sealed them away from any sort of organic, continuous, progressive change towards Westernization. And I think we're going to see in India that it's going to be like this weird hybrid development where, as India is rising now, it's becoming, so I mean, what I said on the previous podcast, the one that will come before yours, Carl, is as listeners listen to this, it has come before yours, is that from the late 1990s in the United States, and you were in the United States too, we saw the future as the end of history, and the end of history was Western man, and everybody was a Western man, except, they spoke different language, they were physically maybe not all white, they ate with chopsticks, but, person in Shanghai is basically the same as a person in New York, but they eat with chopsticks.
Yeah.
That's basically what we thought. I mean, like, does
Yeah.
anyone disagree? I mean, that's what we thought in 1999, right?
Yeah.
What we're seeing with China now, and also even with India, is as they're economically rising to power, they see no need to become Homo Westernists. They're doing their own thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're going on their own path, and I'm not supportive of all the decisions or all the directions they're going. On the other hand, I feel like some of the reaction in the West is it's almost like a Victorian schoolmarm, like, how dare you? Well, I never. Like, you're not going on the path that was laid out for you by us.
Right.
At some like GATT meeting in the late 1990s, when there's this one Western model, this one Euro-American model that we've agreed to, and you guys need to get with the program. And there's a disconnect here because with China's economic rise and its influence, you don't need to get with the program unless you want to. And so China's starting to pick and choose.
Right. I think it's also almost understandable to see how some people felt threatened because we have about 500 years of Western hegemony. Well, depends on which region, but at least like 100 years, 150 years of Western hegemony in much of the world. And now like that model is being threatened. And I can see why some people, react negatively to that. But like it or not, that's already happening. I mean, that's one of my impressions after my 1 month in China. Like this is like the moving away from the Western hegemony is well underway. I mean, it's like so obvious. Just when I'm physically in China, in some no tier Chinese city that nobody hear about, whereas like 10, 20 years ago, I would just be impressed with the pace of change, that the amount of development. And now I feel like, oh wow, this is actually a city I could consider live in. I mean, that's a huge change. Like I would never have thought that, like even in 2010, but now in 2019, I'm like, wow, this is nice. This is I don't mind living here. I mean that's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, as we close out, like I will say, we are today. No one alive today remembers what it was like before Euro American hegemony. Yes. Like our whole lives have been defined by the fact that Western Europe in particular, Northern and Western Europe, and the United States, Canada, the white dominions like Australia, New Zealand, like these are the lodestars of civilization. They are what we aspire to. These are the people that set the terms for human civilization on this planet in the long 20th century. Nobody remembers an age before that, but unless some of us, we could die of a heart attack tomorrow. Who knows, right? But if we have a normal life expectancy, we will live considerably beyond the age of this Western supremacy. We will move into a new age that even when we were young, there was nobody alive that remembered a time before, that remembered, say, 1800, when it was still kind of vague, and the Chinese Empire still had pretense possibly of being a parody, and economically it actually was. It was just there were issues with force protection, but in any case, India was already like partially de facto colonized, even though it was just the East India Company. So I mean, this is so far in the past when there was parity between these Asian societies and Euro America, basically like the greater white world, that we don't know what it's going to be like when that's not setting the terms of the debate. Mm-hmm. We're learning how to have a discussion and how to think about these things now. And it's difficult. And that's why I think you have freakouts, because when the old paradigm is not useful, there's still not usually a new paradigm that can replace it. And in these in-between periods, there's going to be a lot of stress and anxiety because people like rules, right? And so, for example, like, these Pakistanis, I mean, they're having some like really like intense reactions. And yet I think there's also part of them that's a little confused because on some level, the people that are oppressing them are white Christians. Like that is just the default assumption throughout much of recent history. And that is the paradigm that people are raised, like white Christians, like, Christian Europe, United States, like these are the superpowers that are going to be oppressing that you live in the shadow of. The rise of China so rapidly from a 1990 where it's like was at the level was like below India on a per capita basis by some estimates to now when I'm looking up the GDP numbers, it's at parity with Eastern European countries. It has higher income than say the Ukraine, some of these Eastern European countries. Parts of China like Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen are definitely developed societies, like as you just said. I think we're still trying to like wrap our minds around it. I think the Chinese, in a way, it's easier for people in China because it's this huge internal economy, huge internal culture. They don't need the rest of the world in some way, they don't. And that's where we're at right now. And so you're trying to figure this out is part of why I like having discussions with you. And they always go long because there's just so much to talk about. And I think you're our first repeat guest. So, let's talk about something more positive next time we talk. I mean, I think we dispelled some, maybe some of the alarmism, but this is a serious topic, and I hope that it clears. Zach, you got any final words?
No. I think that it's been a fascinating podcast, and I think I'm pretty much in broad agreement with what you guys have said. I think that China is definitely upending the entire world, and it's only natural. And I think a lot of the internal conversations we've been having in the West I think the West is trying to reinvent itself as a global civilization. But I think that process now is kind of being stymied by the fact that there is now a very strong non-Western power that is 1.5 billion people, almost a world in its own right, and they aren't accepting the philosophical dictums that are emerging from nylon, so to speak. So it's interesting, as the Chinese like to say. I don't know if it's an urban myth or not. We live in interesting times. So.
Yeah, we definitely live in interesting times.
Wow, this was an interesting podcast. It was great to have you on, Carl. And people can find you on Twitter. What's your handle on Twitter?
It's just my name, Carl Za. That's Carl spelled with a C, C-A-R-L, and my last name, Z-H-A. That's Z as in zebra, H as in Henry, A as in apple. So Carl Za, one word.
And you have a podcast that you've been. It's a solo right now. Can you tell people what they should look for on whatever they search on?
Yeah, you can just either search my name in Google, again, Carl Za, or you can search for Silk and Steel podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, it was great to talk to you.
Sorry, one last question. I'm really sorry. Who's the profile pic? Is it a Tajiki woman or who's?
My Twitter profile picture.
Yeah.
Yes. She's actually a female Kurdish fighter that died in, I think, a couple years ago. She died in the fight against ISIS, and she was actually referred to by some stupid British media as the Angelina Jolie of the Kurdish militia. Her name was Asia Ramazan Antar.
Yeah, I heard about her. It's maybe someday we should talk about Syria. I know you've gotten into some tussles on that question on Twitter. You get into a lot of tussles, and
I do.
It's always. You always live in interesting online times, and so do I. So, we got our haters out there, but maybe we're doing something right.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you later, bro.
All right, thanks.
Tune in next week for Brown.